Something unsettling had begun to unfold in the quiet town. Puppies were vanishing, not just one or two, but every last one of them. Families were baffled, their hearts heavy with confusion and worry. At first, people whispered theories. Perhaps a thief was lurking in the shadows, stealing the young pups under the cover of darkness. Others feared that a wild predator from the nearby forest had grown bold. But the truth was far stranger than anyone could have dreamed. It was not a cunning thief, nor a bloodthirsty beast. It was a bear. And the reason behind this mysterious behavior would shake the town to its core. When a group of determined townsfolk followed the animal deep into the forest, they stumbled upon something that left them frozen with a mix of awe and fear. But before we reach that chilling discovery, let us step back and meet Jake, a man known by everyone in town. Strong and built in spirit, yet gentle in soul, Jake was in his late 40s and has spent his entire life nestled in the rhythms of the town. He was a familiar face, but what made him stand out even more was his companion, a massive black bear named Bruno. Bruno was not just a pet, he was family. Jake had found the tiny cub years ago, abandoned and frail, barely clinging to life. Moved by compassion, Jake took him in. He raised the bear with care and warmth, teaching him not through force, but through trust and patience. Despite his massive size and strength, Bruno had grown into a gentle creature, playful, affectionate, and fiercely loyal to Jake. The townspeople were used to the unusual pair strolling through the streets, their bond inspiring smiles and curiosity. There was something special about them, something rare. But lately, Jake had noticed a shift. Bruno was different, restless, secretive, and slipping into the woods far more frequently than ever before. Something about his movements seemed off. Just a few houses down, the Wilson family was dealing with a quiet heartbreak. Their beloved golden retriever, Daisy, had recently given birth to 6 adorable puppies. They were tiny, wobbly, full of squeaks and snuggles, the kind of joy that makes a home feel brighter. The Wilsons adored them and were already dreaming of placing each one in a loving home when they were old enough. Then, the nightmare began. One morning, Mrs. Wilson stepped into the backyard to check on the pups, only to find that one had vanished. At first, she believed it had wandered off on its own, though she knew how unlikely that was. Such young puppies could barely take a few steps without stumbling. Panic set in. She and her husband searched every corner of their property, calling out, looking under porches, beneath bushes. But the puppy was gone. The only clue left behind was a faint trail of paw prints leading toward the dark edge of the forest. The next night, another puppy vanished, then another, and another. By the end of the week, all 6 puppies were gone. Whispers spread through town like wildfire. Fear settled in. Could it be coyotes? A dog snatcher? Was something sinister stalking their homes in the night? Every theory felt possible, yet none made complete sense. Jake was disturbed by the news. The disappearances gnawed at him, not only because of the missing puppies, but because of Bruno. His loyal bear had been acting stranger by the day. Jake didn't want to believe it. Bruno had never shown aggression, never even growled at another animal. He was a gentle soul, more likely to cuddle than to harm. Still, something didn't feel right, and Jake could no longer shake the uneasy thought creeping into his mind. What if it was Bruno? He tried to dismiss it. Bruno was not a predator. He had been raised in love, not wildness. But the doubt lingered and grew each time Jake saw the bear slinking into the forest under the cover of night. It was unlike him. Bruno had never been a solitary wanderer, especially not when the world was dark. So one evening Jake made a decision. He would follow Bruno. He waited until the bear began his usual twilight journey, then trailed behind him, careful not to make a sound. The forest felt heavier than usual. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made Jake's heart pound harder. Bruno was not simply wandering, he had a purpose. His steps were deliberate, focused. Jake remained hidden, breathing quietly, eyes never leaving his old friend. And then, he caught the scent. Puppies. His stomach dropped. No, it could not be. He crept closer, brushing branches aside until the scene before him became painfully clear. There, in a small clearing nestled beneath thick bushes, lay a pile of soft blankets, and nestled within them, 6 tiny puppies, alive, unharmed, and cradled gently in Bruno's massive paws. Jake could barely breathe. He stood motionless, eyes wide with disbelief. This was not the brutal scene he had feared. Bruno was not harming the pups. On the contrary, he was watching over them, carefully, tenderly. He nudged them with his nose, keeping them warm, making soft, rumbling sounds that seemed to soothe their tiny whimpers. Jake's mind reeled. This was no act of aggression. It was something else entirely, something more tender, more mysterious. When Jake accidentally stepped on a branch, the sharp crack split the air. Bruno's head whipped around. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Jake saw it. Confusion, worry, and something like guilt shining in Bruno's gaze. The bear stepped back slowly, releasing the puppies and lowering his large frame to the ground. He looked not like a thief, but like a child caught in the act, unsure whether to be ashamed or understood. Jake stepped forward, trembling slightly, reaching out. His hand touched Bruno's thick fur, and a wave of emotion passed through him. Fear, confusion, compassion. "Bruno," he whispered, voice breaking. "What have you done, buddy?" The bear let out a low, mournful sound, soft and full of sorrow. Then Jake began to understand. Bruno had never known a real family. He had no brothers, no mother to guide him. Jake had been everything to him. Perhaps in his own clumsy, instinctual way, Bruno was trying to become what he never had, a protector, a guardian, a father. Jake sank to his knees, staring at the puppies nestled in the blankets. They were warm, safe, unharmed. Bruno had been watching over them, not stealing them for harm, but out of a deep, instinctual urge to care. But questions still filled Jake's mind. Why these puppies? Why had Bruno taken them from the Wilsons? Why not stay with Jake, his closest companion? The answers were not clear, not yet. But one thing was, Bruno was not dangerous. He was not a monster. He was trying to give love he never received, trying to feel what he never knew. Still, Jake knew this could not continue. The puppies did not belong to him or to Bruno. Their family was waiting. They needed to be returned. And yet, something inside Jake had changed. That night, as he walked back home with the puppies cradled in his arms and Bruno lumbering beside him in silence, Jake's heart was heavier than ever. He could not ignore what had happened. But what was he supposed to do next? Bruno sniffed the air, letting his presence be known without threat. The moment felt heavy, quiet, charged with emotion. Bruno's deep brown eyes met Jake's, and in that gaze, Jake saw something that surprised him. It wasn't resistance, it was sadness. Bruno lowered his head as if he understood. Not fully, not in a human way, but enough to sense the weight of what Jake was asking. The bear looked at the puppies one by one, nudging them gently with his nose. One of the smaller pups yawned and pawed at Bruno's fur, making a soft whimper. Bruno didn't move, just closed his eyes briefly, like he was trying to hold on to that moment. Jake swallowed the lump in his throat. "I know, buddy," he whispered, stepping beside Bruno. You were trying to be something you never got to have, a family. Slowly, carefully, Jake picked up the first puppy. Bruno didn't stop him. He simply sat back on his haunches, watching with quiet acceptance as Jake placed the pup into Mrs. Wilson's arms. Then another, and another. The Wilsons moved gently, their fear of the bear melting into something else, a strange, hesitant respect. When the last puppy was cradled safely in Mr. Wilson's jacket, Bruno let out a soft sound. Not a growl, not a roar, a mournful sigh. He turned his massive body and lay down on the forest floor, head resting between his paws. For the first time, he looked old, tired, lonely. Jake knelt beside him and stroked the thick fur behind Bruno's ears. "You did good," he said, voice trembling. "You protected them, like a father would." Mrs. Wilson approached slowly, still holding one of the puppies. "Maybe," she said, "Bruno just wanted to feel what it's like, to love something small, to be needed." Jake nodded. He never had anyone like him. I guess he saw those puppies and something inside him woke up. They all stood in silence for a moment. Then Mrs. Wilson spoke again, softer this time. "We can bring them to visit, sometimes, if it's safe. He shouldn't have to lose everything." Jake looked at her, stunned. "You'd really do that?" She nodded. "He never meant harm. And the puppies, they love him." Jake smiled, relief flooding his chest. "Thank you." As the Wilsons turned to head home, puppies in arms, Bruno stayed behind, watching until they disappeared through the trees. Jake stayed with him for a while, just sitting beside his old friend, saying nothing. Because sometimes love doesn't make sense. Sometimes it comes from the most unexpected places, even from a bear who just wanted a family. And in the heart of the forest, beneath the quiet rustling of the trees, Jake and Bruno sat together, not as man and beast, but as two souls who understood what it meant to lose and what it meant to care, and maybe what it meant to heal. Bruno took his time. After a few moments, the massive bear slowly stood up, his immense paws pressing into the earth with a weight that made the ground subtly tremble. His movements were deliberate, heavy not just with size but with emotion. He stepped forward cautiously, his deep, thoughtful eyes locked on Jake's. There was no anger in them, only a quiet, aching concern, a sense of hesitation that mirrored Jake's own heart. Bruno didn't understand everything, but he understood enough to feel the weight of what was being asked of him. Jake's heart clenched as he watched the bear approach. He could see it in Bruno's eyes. He didn't want to lose the puppies. They had become more than just companions to him. In his wild, protective heart, they were family. Jake knew that pushing too hard could ruin everything. So he moved gently, carefully bending down and lifting one of the small puppies into his arms. He didn't clutch the little creature possessively. Instead, he turned to Bruno, holding the puppy out, not as a prize being taken away, but as a bridge, a gesture of trust and understanding. He was trying to say, "I'm not stealing from you. I'm helping them go home." Bruno sniffed the air slowly, his broad snout lifting slightly toward the puppy. He studied the little one, his eyes filled with something Jake never thought he'd see in a wild animal. Mourning. A silent sorrow clung to the bear as he watched, still and quiet, not with confusion but with reluctant understanding. For a moment it looked as if the bear was silently weighing his emotions against instinct, measuring his connection to these puppies against the truth Jake was gently offering. There was silence. No growl, no sudden movement, just the steady, fragile pause of a heart learning to let go. Jake swallowed hard and spoke again, his voice calm and tender. "Bruno, it's okay. You did a good job. You've taken care of them so well. But now they need to go home. They have a family waiting for them. You protected them, and they're safe because of you. But now it's time to let them go. Bruno didn't snarl. He didn't turn away in anger. Instead, the bear slowly stepped back, lowering his great head and releasing a deep, mournful sigh that echoed in the stillness. It wasn't a sound of defeat, it was the sound of understanding, of reluctant acceptance. With great care, Jake handed each of the puppies back to Mrs. Wilson, one by one. She received them gently, her arms wrapping around each tiny body as she whispered words of comfort and relief. The puppies, small but full of energy and warmth, nestled into her embrace, their little tails wagging softly. Jake glanced back at Bruno, his chest tight. "It's for the best," he said softly, almost a whisper. "You did something incredible, Bruno, but it's time." Bruno stood quietly, watching. His large eyes followed the puppies, not with rage or resistance, but with an ache that lingered in the air. He didn't move for a long time. He just stood there, taking it all in, as if letting each heartbeat help him release the weight of the moment. And then slowly he turned. With heavy steps and one last, lingering glance at the puppies, Bruno began to walk back toward the forest. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He simply walked, back into the trees, back into the life he had come from. He paused once at the edge of the woods, his massive body silhouetted against the sunlight filtering through the branches. Then, with a final look that said everything words could not, he disappeared into the shadows. Jake stood in silence watching him go. There was pain in his chest, an ache that came from watching a friend walk away. But there was peace too. The puppies were safe. Bruno had done what few could. He had let go of something he loved because it was the right thing to do. It wasn't easy, not for a bear, not for anyone, but it had been the right choice, and that made all the difference. Bruno the bear wasn't physically there, but Jake still felt an unshakable connection deep in his soul. As he stood silently, gazing out at the trees that framed the horizon, he listened intently to the gentle sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the distant bird calls, the rhythm of nature itself. For the very first time in his life, Jake felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude, not just for the experiences, but for everything Bruno had brought into his heart. "Thank you, buddy," Jake whispered softly to the wind, hoping that somehow, in some magical way, Bruno could hear his words. "You've taught me more than I could have ever expected." And with those words carried into the trees, Jake turned and walked back toward his home, the weight in his heart lifted by the strength of an invisible bond. It wasn't about taming Bruno or keeping him as a pet. It wasn't even about protecting the puppies. It had become something far greater, something rooted in mutual understanding, silent respect, and a kind of learning that didn't need words to be felt. Ever since that powerful moment with Bruno and the puppies, Jake couldn't stop thinking about it. Every morning, like clockwork, he woke up earlier than usual, his mind flooded with the images and emotions from that day. He kept recalling the quiet strength in Bruno's eyes, the calm and trust he showed as he let go of the puppies, the ones he had clearly loved. That image stayed with Jake like a sacred memory, and it made him realize that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the same old routine he had grown used to. Perhaps it was time to change, to grow, to take a new path. One peaceful evening, as the sky turned soft with the colors of twilight, Jake sat alone on his porch with a warm cup of coffee in hand. The air was cool and the forest hummed quietly in the background. Suddenly, he heard a faint rustling sound behind him. Slowly he turned, and his heart swelled. Walking gently toward him was Bruno. The bear's steps were slow and calm, not rushed or urgent, as if he had simply come by to visit a friend. Jake had always known there was something special about Bruno, but in that moment, the connection felt deeper, something spiritual, something unspoken yet undeniable. Hey, Bruno, Jake said softly, a gentle smile spreading across his face. Bruno stopped a few feet away and sat down with quiet dignity, locking eyes with Jake in a moment that felt timeless. Neither moved. It was as if they were having a full conversation without ever saying a word. Jake's heart was full. Bruno had always been a good bear, but now it was so much more. Now they truly understood each other. Jake placed his coffee mug gently on the porch rail and slowly rose to his feet. Step by step, he walked toward the bear, his movements calm and respectful. Without hesitation, Jake reached out his hand. Bruno leaned in and softly nuzzled Jake's palm. Jake let out a quiet, joyful laugh, his other hand reaching up to scratch behind Bruno's ears. It was such a small act, so simple, but to Jake, it meant everything. In that instant, something shifted inside him. He realized Bruno wasn't just a bear who had wandered into his life. He wasn't just a rescued animal. He was a true friend, a guide, a mirror showing Jake who he truly was and who he could become. That moment planted a seed in Jake's heart. He couldn't go on living the same way anymore. Not after everything that had happened, not after what he had seen and felt. He knew there was more he could offer the world. His life needed to be about more than just quiet routines. He had witnessed something real, something powerful, and he felt a responsibility to turn that experience into something meaningful. It was time to help more than just Bruno. It was time to help all animals who needed care, love, and second chances. The very next morning, as sunlight spilled gently through the trees, Jake made a decision, a bold one. He was going to visit the Wilsons. He had something on his heart, something important, and even though it wasn't something he had ever imagined himself saying, it suddenly felt like the right time. Bruno had shown him that when life opens a new door, you have to be brave enough to walk through it. As Jake walked the familiar path to the Wilsons' home, a quiet nervousness stirred inside him. He wasn't someone who opened up easily, especially about his feelings. But this time, something was different. The morning air was crisp, and the golden sun lit the path like a silent encouragement. It felt like a new beginning. When he arrived, Mrs. Wilson was outside, kneeling in her garden, her hands gently tending to the soil. She looked up as he approached, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Jake, what a nice surprise," she said with genuine kindness. "Hi, Mrs. Wilson," Jake replied, his voice carrying a hint of nervous excitement. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened with the puppies, and there's something I want to talk to you about." Mrs. Wilson set down her tools and gave him her full attention, sensing the seriousness in his voice. "Of course, Jake. What's on your mind?" Jake paused, taking a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I've been living alone for a long time, and I've kept to myself. But after everything that's happened, with Bruno, the puppies, I can't shake the feeling that I need to do more. I want to help, especially with animals." Her eyes lit up with gentle excitement. "Jake, that's wonderful news. We've always known how deeply you care about animals. What kind of help are you thinking about?" Jake smiled, the nerves fading as his heart led the way. "I want to start an animal rescue, a real one. A place where animals can be safe, where people can bring them if they need help. A place of second chances. It feels right." Mrs. Wilson's face glowed with warmth. "Jake, that's amazing. Truly, we need something like that around here. And if anyone can make it happen, it's you. You've got the heart for it." For the first time in what felt like forever, Jake felt a deep happiness stir in his chest. He wasn't just floating through life anymore. He was stepping into something bigger than himself. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I've learned so much from Bruno and those little pups. And now, I want to give back. I want to make it count." Mrs. Wilson reached out and gently touched his arm. "You're going to do great, Jake. And if you ever need help or advice, don't hesitate to ask. We're all behind you." Jake left the Wilsons' home with a heart lighter than it had been in years. A quiet fire burned within him. This was it. A new chapter. A calling. He wasn't just caring for one bear anymore. He was stepping into a purpose that could change lives, human and animal alike. When he returned home, he stood at his window for a moment, looking out at the vast forest beyond. Somewhere in the trees, Bruno was out there, living wild and free, and Jake knew, without a doubt, that they would always share something powerful. The bear had given him a gift, one he could never repay, but one he would carry forward with every life he touched. Hope swelled in Jake's chest. The idea of starting an animal rescue filled him with energy and purpose. It wasn't just exciting, it was the beginning of something that felt bigger than himself. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time, those challenges didn't feel heavy. They felt like a mission, a reason to rise every morning with passion and drive. Bruno had changed everything. Now it was Jake's turn to change the world. Jake spent the next few days making plans. He began by jotting down everything he would need: a shelter space for the animals, food, proper medical care, and most importantly, people he could trust to help. Money was tight, and Jake knew this wouldn't be easy. But he also knew something even more important. There were good people out there who cared. All he had to do was reach out. So he picked up the phone and called his old friend Mark, who worked at the local animal shelter. Mark had always had a big heart and a strong love for animals, just like Jake. When Jake told him his idea, Mark's voice lit up with enthusiasm. "Jake, that's amazing. You've always had such a heart for animals. This is exactly what our community needs. Count me in. I'll help however I can." Hearing those words filled Jake with a fresh wave of hope. He wasn't alone in this. Mark's encouragement gave him the confidence to dive in head first. They agreed to meet the next day to start planning the rescue and figuring out what steps they needed to take to get things moving. Meanwhile, Jake knew he had to make his property ready. He couldn't build a rescue without a safe, welcoming space for the animals. Luckily, he had a spacious backyard and a few old sheds, unused and worn, but full of potential. With some elbow grease, they could become warm shelters for animals in need. It wouldn't be quick or easy, but Jake was determined to make it happen. The next morning, bright and early, Jake and Mark walked around the property, discussing their plans. Mark pointed to the old sheds and nodded thoughtfully. "We'll need to clean these up first," he said, inspecting the area. "But with a little work and some help, we can make this place really nice. It could be something special. We can also put up some fencing to let the animals roam safely," Mark suggested, his voice calm but full of possibility. Jake nodded, the thought sparking a wave of energy within him. "I've still got some old materials from when I worked on the barn. We can use those for the fencing. I'll start cleaning out the sheds this weekend." Over the next few weeks, Jake and Mark dove into their work with focus and determination. They cleared the overgrown weeds, scrubbed the sheds, and rebuilt the fencing. They even created cozy little bedding spots for the animals, transforming the space into something inviting. It was hard work, demanding a lot of time and effort, but Jake felt an overwhelming sense of pride. As the rescue took shape, it wasn't just the physical space that was changing, it was his purpose, his future. Jake also reached out to the local community for support. He posted flyers around town to let people know about the new animal rescue and to ask for donations. He set up a website, hoping to spread the word further and find more volunteers. At first, the response was slow, but as the days passed, more and more people began showing interest. They wanted to help, and that gave Jake a renewed sense of hope. One afternoon, a woman named Sarah came by to check on the progress. She had seen the flyer and felt compelled to help. Sarah had worked in an animal shelter before, and Jake was thrilled to meet her. "I'd love to volunteer," she said with a smile. "I've worked at an animal shelter before, and I think this is a wonderful idea. I can help take care of the animals and assist with finding them homes." Jake felt a deep sense of gratitude. That would be amazing, Sarah. We could really use someone with your experience. With Sarah on board, things started moving faster. The rescue was officially open, and soon they had their first residents. Two stray dogs brought in by a local family who had found them wandering the streets. Jake and Mark were excited, and Sarah jumped right in to help care for them. Jake could hardly believe how quickly everything was falling into place. What had started as an unexpected idea, born from a bear and a few puppies, was now a fully functioning animal rescue. Every time he thought about it, a smile tugged at his lips. Bruno, the bear, had opened his eyes to a new sense of purpose, and now Jake was living that purpose every single day. In the months that followed, the rescue continued to grow. More animals, dogs, cats, and even a few rabbits, found their way to safety. Jake and Sarah worked tirelessly to care for them, and the community continued to show their support. Volunteers came by, and donations flooded in. It was amazing how many people wanted to make a difference, to help improve the lives of animals. But through it all, there was one thing Jake would never forget: how Bruno had changed his life. Without that wild bear, without the puppies he had protected, Jake might never have had the idea to start the rescue. It had been an experience that had taught him so much, and it had brought out the best in him. He often found himself reflecting on Bruno and the puppies, feeling thankful for everything that had unfolded. One evening, as Jake sat on his porch sipping a cup of tea, he looked out at the rescue area. The animals were resting peacefully in their pens, and a quiet sense of calm washed over him. He smiled to himself, feeling a deep sense of happiness and fulfillment. This was his new beginning. He had found a purpose, a cause worth dedicating his life to. And all of it, every bit of it, had started with a bear and a few puppies.